It is the dawn of 104 BC, and the bleak, freezing winter matches the darkness and despair in the very midst of every Roman heart. All around the Seven Hills, master of the Mediterranean for 4 decades, the screeching lamentations of the bereaved fill the alleys and insular tenements. Those citizens whose fathers, brothers, and husbands were not among the tens of thousands fallen on the cursed field of the Arausio still quake, not only at the terrible sounds, but also at the petrifying prospect that the hordes of exultant Cimbri and Teutons will now march directly for the city. It is the nightmare prospect for the people that had presumed themselves invincible to the arms of all other tribes. That notion is now seen to be a dangerous illusion. The panic becomes acute when stories of the fates of the Roman survivors begin to circulate in the crossroads, taverns, and temples. Beneath the ceaseless din of the howling and prayers, it is said that the barbarians did not only put the unfortunate captive legionaries to death, they even drowned the horses of the Romans, holding them under the water of a filthy Gaulish river until their kicking and bucking stifled to lifelessness. More nauseously still, while the majority of the legionaries were callously hung from the neck to slowly choke, others underwent a veritably hideous fate. These, it is whispered, were given over to the priestesses of the tribes, the witches committing the most unspeakable atrocities on their defenseless bodies. The city needs a champion. Just as the mother of cities appears to be in its blackest moment, the gods deliver the answer to its prayers. From the far reaches of Africa, it is announced that 2 conquerors are sailing home. The captured form of the Numidian king Jugurtha, bound captive in the belly of their ship. Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla are powering toward the coast of Italy, their wits keen and their appetite hungry for war on those who have slaughtered and degraded their fellow citizens. All of Rome bursts into an exultation of thanksgiving, and the stage is set for a conflagration larger and more savage than anything Rome has seen since the Punic army and its elephants crossed the Alps more than a century earlier. Marius's return to Rome and his acceptance of the consulship are overshadowed completely by the losses on the Arausio. There is much patrician unease at Marius's appointment, and it is incontestable that he is there at the behest of the people and not the aristocracy. Not only is he breaking with norms by serving a consecutive premiership, he is also elected without being present in Rome. This second term is no surprise to Marius himself, for while he was leading the war in Africa, a prophetess brought forth a vision of his future, and she told him he would be consul on no fewer than 7 occasions. Already, those dissatisfied members of the patrician class are gravitating to Sulla, the man they claim deserves the real credit for leading the mission to capture Jugurtha. The jibes irritate Marius, but he and Sulla remain fast friends for the moment. Marius's task in this second, unusual consulship is an onerous one. While Rome has a greater reserve of manpower than all of its rivals and enemies, there is no state on earth that can lose close to 100,000 trained men in a single day and not feel the strain. It's now generally agreed that Marius's reforms of the Roman army are somewhat over-exaggerated, but whatever the truth of his introducing a new design of pila, or reforming the central tactical units from the maniple to the cohort, there is no doubt that he is at the forefront of transforming the legionary system as it had existed for the previous 2 centuries. Marius's African triumph lifts the populace from the gloom of the Arausio aftermath, with gargantuan displays of captured riches, prizes, and captives. It is a spectacle not seen in the 4 decades since Carthage and Corinth fell in the same year, and all of Rome is there to see it. The new man Marius and his patrician protege Sulla lap up the applause, while scorn, derision, and abuse are poured onto the chained form of Jugurtha. Work for the coming campaign begins in the immediate aftermath of the triumph. Marius and Sulla have been discussing the correct approach to the war in the north since news of it first reached them in Africa, and they know precisely what it is that they need to do while in Rome. Requiring a completely new army, Marius has the Senate relax the restrictions on landless men enlisting in the ranks, as well as making promises to the hard-pressed Italian allies who have also suffered untold casualties in the catastrophe of Arausio. With his own legionaries almost entirely staying in Africa on the promise of land to reward their service, Marius's initial force is a reserve legion raised the previous year by the consul Publius Rutilius Rufus. This was originally intended to join the now destroyed main army in Gaul after further reinforcements had been raised, and with little physical work to occupy them in Rome, Rufus called in Lanista gladiator trainers and put the reserves into a virile regimen of physical conditioning, drill, and weapon training. On inspecting the reserves a year later, Marius realizes that he has effectively inherited an army of elite prize fighters that also retains military discipline and tactical knowledge. He resolves that the rest of his army will follow this new course of training. Luckily for him, there is now no shortage of volunteers. His name acts like a talisman, and men from across Rome and Italy join in their tens of thousands. It is well known that Marius's African army became rich through booty and allocated lands, and Italy still has no shortage of young men who desire both of these things. With Rufus's reserve legion as his central unit and an eager, if skittish, greater force numbering in the tens of thousands following in its wake, Marius moves north toward the Roman border outpost of Aquae Sextiae, with Sulla preparing himself for a number of missions behind enemy lines. Working alongside him will be Quintus Sertorius, the dashing young tribune who had been one of the very few to escape at Arausio. He had done this by swimming the Rhone in full armor and with his weapons, a very impressive demonstration of prowess. Together, Sertorius and Sulla will act as Marius's eyes in Gaul, while the general himself strengthens the limbs of his army. Finding that the Cimbrian Teuton tribes have not followed up on their incredible opportunity to invade Italy, Marius chooses to push past Aquae Sextiae and makes a new outpost on the Rhone, building a veritable Roman bastion that would be impregnable to both assault and siege. While Sulla and Sertorius move out to reconnoiter the area, spying on the tribes of the region and opening negotiations to renew ally status where appropriate, Marius uses the time to hammer discipline and military mastery into his raw recruits. It transpires in the meantime that the tribes have moved west rather than south, and they are heading in the direction of Spain. Marius knows that there will be senators calling for the disbandment of his army with the passing of the immediate threat, but he senses that the Republic has not seen the last of the Cimbri, the Teutons, and their confederates. In any case, Rome, the Roman people, demand vengeance for the humiliation on the Arausio. The honor of the Republic cannot be cleansed until there is a reckoning. Marius bides his time, conditioning his men further with marches, learning the dips and rivets of the land of southern Gaul. He also commissions a very large dredging and expansion of the mouth of the Rhone, widening it for the easy access of supply ships, as well as running a canal from the river to the interior to supply his camps. There is a sharp exchange and subjugation of the Volcae, a people that Caesar will later record has raided as far as Greece, and other tribes learn the lesson and renew their alliance and submission to Rome. The year 103 ends with another consulship for Marius in Absentia, and Sulla making overtures to the Marsi tribe, persuading them to pledge fealty to Rome. By this time, Marius has received word that the Cimbri and Teutons are moving once more, steadily rolling in the direction of the legions for which they now hold no fear. They have been joined by the Ambrones. At some point, the tribes diverge, with the Teutons and Ambrones moving in one direction toward southern Gaul, their target almost certainly the rich port of Massilia, while the Cimbri seem to have moved directly toward Italy and bypassed Marius's force. Seeing the situation through the intelligence network he has assembled, Marius elects to send his junior consul, Quintus Lutatius Catullus, with a force to hold the Cimbri in place, while he moves with the greater part of his army and neutralizes the threat of the Teutons and Ambrones. Sulla is sent with Catullus. There are rumors that the patrician officer is unhappy at a lack of recognition from Marius, but those in the know have it that Marius does not entirely trust the ability of Catullus, and he wants an able man on hand to steer proceedings with the holding force. Arausio was caused when the patrician Caepio would not cooperate with the new man Maximus. Being a new man himself, Marius does not want a repeat of the same disaster, and so he uses the high-born but practical Sulla as his mouthpiece with Catullus. Catullus and Sulla make their way to the valley of Atesis, there to await the Cimbri, who it is said number 400,000 tribespeople alone. Marius, meanwhile, has placed himself and his main force right in the path of the Teutons and Ambrones, who have crossed the Rhone tributary known as the Druentia. The tribes see the elevated and well-dug-in Roman position, but their confidence following the annihilation of several Roman armies makes them feel invulnerable. The sheer number of their fighters is such that they imagine they can swarm and envelop the Roman camp like a bucket of water poured over an anthill. Marius, however, has prepared his camp with all of the necessary bulwarks and emplacements. Deep ditches surround his walls, backed by tall, packed earthen embankments. These are topped with sharpened timber stakes, between which the legionaries stand with slings, bows, and javelins. At their king Teutobad's cry, the tribes rush forward, howling for blood, baying their vigor, and deriding the Romans for weak, stunted, feeble wretches. They clamber across the field and up the slope, sprinting to be the first to get to grips with the enemy. Next, some of them jump the ditch in one bound, others wait until branches and timbers are thrown down over it to allow them to cross. When a few Teutons make it past the ditch, through the projectiles and up to the embankment, there are legionaries waiting there to hurl javelins. The Roman pila with their viciously thin barbs pierce through unprotected flesh and then wrench the victim to the ground, paralyzed with the weight of their wooden shafts and added lead bearings. The attack breaks off in the approaching gloom of evening, and the warriors and their leaders return to their fires to take account of their tactics and losses. The next day dawns with a renewed attack, and when this fails in the same manner as the first, the Teutons are reduced to calling out to the Romans to face them in the open field. The legionaries, whose zeal is at a high, wish to chase the tribesmen back down to their camps and immolate them in their entirety. But Marius will have none of it. He orders all to hold to their positions, and such is the command he enjoys over his men after their long training period, they now fear him to a greater degree than they do the enemy. This is precisely what Marius desires, for the next assault ends in the same manner as the last pair, and the legionaries now bat away the painted, screaming warriors with derision bordering on disdain. The legionaries have lost any fear that they had for the Gauls. The next day brings a repeat, and even the tribal insults and challenges levelled at Marius himself draw only a mocking response. Teutabat realizes that Marius has provisioned his fortress to withstand a long siege, but he has no such means to feed his massive confederation in one place for any sustained length of time. After a third day of futile attacks, the orders ring out that the peoples will move south to Massilia once more and leave the cowardly Romans cringing behind their fence. They move off in their hundreds of thousands, oaths and insults the final shots they throw at the Roman palisade. The legionaries watch them march, pride stung by the veto on offensive attacks by their commander. But the moment that the tribes cross the horizon, Marius gives his own order to strike the camp and move in pursuit. Now, the interminable period of training and conditioning comes into its own. Marius's superbly fit legionaries can march at a faster pace for a longer period than any enemy force, helped along by the fact Marius has dispensed with many of the cumbersome wagons and slave retinues of earlier armies. His legionaries are self-sufficient operatives, carrying their own kit and rations, ready to fight or construct a fortified camp at a moment's notice. They shadow the tribes, marching alongside their streaming throng, and when the two hosts near the vicinity of Aquae Sextiae, Marius knows the ground on which he will place his formations. It is another clearing of elevated terrain, looking down on a stream and a massive tribal camp on the opposite bank. Here his legionaries have no direct access to the water. They will draw it only by coming into contact with the enemy, and Marius tells them that if they wish to drink, then the price they pay will be in blood. Whether it be their blood or the tribes, that is up to them. In the evening, the legionaries work on their castra fortifications, but the camp followers are fending for themselves, and they are now in the throes of thirst. Armed with any implements to hand, a few spears and swords that have found their way into their midst, as well as axes and hatchets, the stragglers venture down to the water to fill their skins and jugs. As they near the stream, they see and hear that it is the Ambrones who are closest to the bank, with some bathing and the great majority in their camp, feasting and drinking after a long day of marching. Those close to the water shout on sight of the Romans, and the camp begins to stir like a wasp's nest. The Roman camp followers are determined to get their fill and press on. Soon there is fighting on the bank between the two sides, with more and more of the Ambrones joining from the camp. Others are inside, drunk and full of food, but nevertheless donning what armor they have and going out to fight what they believe to be a Roman assault. Still, Marius restrains the legionaries, even though a good number of the followers are Roman officers' servants, and now a mass of Ambrones are crossing the stream onto the other side and shouting out their tribal name as a war cry. This is heard by the contingent of Ligurians, Rome's allies, who share a common origin with this tribe, but who are offended at their use of the name. The Ligurians charge down the hill and engage the Ambrones furiously, the noise and clamour deafening. The Ligurians are aided by the disparate state of the Ambrones, with the majority in the process of coming through the water, and yet more still on the far side. The fight is vicious and wild, but a sound cuts through the din and causes an immediate reaction on both sides. It is the Roman Carnix. Marius has unleashed the legions. With the pent-up fury of 2 years awaiting this moment, the Romans move like starving panthers released from their cage and onto a herd of trapped elk. Their momentum and ferocity is irresistible, and the Ligurians almost have to step aside as the regulars hurl themselves down the slope and slice into the Ambrones on the bank. Panic and despair are the instant responses from the tribesmen, and they break and attempt to escape back over the river. The Romans do not pause, and instead hurtle after them. It is said that so many are cut down that the water runs red with blood and chokes with carcasses. There is no respite on the far side, for the Romans form up once more and proceed to chase the remaining Ambrones back up to their own camp. An incredible spectacle unfolds as the remainder of the inhabitants of the camp rush out to defend against this attack, and the Ambrones women beat their men back to fight the enemy as much as they rain blows down on the remorseless legionaries. With their kitchen knives and bare hands, they slash at the shields, ignoring serious wounds until they fall to the earth and a kinsman takes their place. Stories abound of women killing their own children so that they will not be enslaved by the legions and meet a fate worse than death. The fight is selfless, it is heroic, it is noble, but it is doomed. The Romans slaughter all. It is said that the Ambrones die in their tens of thousands, until, satisfied with their work for the moment, the Romans return to their camp to shelter for the night. Desolation is left in their wake. A dreadful slump follows when the night chill and darkness descends, for although the Romans have triumphed over one sizable portion of their enemies, the Teutons and the surviving Ambrones that have fled to them are still out there in the dark. Marius orders that there is to be no drinking or celebration. The battle is not over. As a confirmation of his words, howls and wails ring out in the darkness. The tribes are all around, and Marius commands every unit to stay on guard for a night assault. The legionaries thus spend the nocturnal hours in armor, eating what food they can lay hands on, and listening to the inhuman moans and shrieks that sound closer to the keening of animals than that of human beings. The next morning, the cold from the river seeps into exhausted limbs. The men ache to their very bones. Through the mist, there is no sign of the Teutons arranging themselves in force. Marius has the general alert stood down, and the legionaries are given leave to rest through the day, eat hot food, and replenish their strength. Their rejuvenated morale takes a slight dip, however, when more than 3,000 of their cavalry arm under Claudius Marcellus forms up and rides out of the camp, with no explanation given to the legionaries and auxiliaries. Feeling more exposed than previously, Marius's men gird themselves for the struggles to come and follow their commander's advice to sharpen and polish weapons and armor, and otherwise spend their time in repose. On the other side of the river, the Teutons and the few remaining Ambrones seethe and whip themselves into fury. Fully convinced now that the Romans are cowards who will only attack when the circumstances are certain in their favor, They are incandescent at the atrocity committed the day before on the Ambronid tribes. Tutabad leads them in a vow of vengeance. Attack will come whenever the opportunity presents itself. Night passes again without incident for both camps, and when morning arrives, the Teuton scouts watch in glee as the Roman porter gates open, and legionaries begin to file out into the open under the cover of archers on the palisade and a cavalry line in front. The Teuton sentries race back to report to their chiefs, and within minutes their camp is teeming with warriors preparing themselves for battle. The tumult of the Teutons is contrasted with the silent order of the Romans, the cohorts now being assembled in large numbers, clearly offering the open battle that Tutabad has for so long been demanding from them. The Teutons race out from the camp in their hundreds, and then in their thousands, across the shallow river, and right up the hill where the Romans are getting into line. As the Romans take their positions, Marius's message to them is relayed by the centurions. Launch the javelins the moment the enemy comes into range. Have no fear, for the tribes will be at the disadvantage running up the slope. Already the Teutons are coming into range of the cavalry screen, and the horsemen move off. Their numbers now are filling the eye line of every legionary. They look like a churning ocean, a giant wave washing up the hill toward the suddenly thin-seeming cohort ranks. There is a huge cheer as Marius is spotted, taking a place in the front line. Legionaries tighten the strap on their helmets, close their grip on the leather of sword and javelin. Their hysteric fear of the enemy is now well damped down by Marius's insistence on them fending off the daily attacks on their camps, but there is the ever-present tingling excitement of battle's lethal threat. The Teutons are berserk with anger and bloodlust, pushing aside their own qualms in the knowledge that they have bested the Romans in open battle many times. The Romans hold fast while the tribesmen sprint ever closer, feeling that all it will take is contact, and the horde will rip clear through the Romans and their camp like cyclone tearing a hut from its foundations. They are so close that they can feel the moment of battle upon them. Swords and spears are raised high. And that is the second that the first volley of Roman spears is lashed forth. The javelins cut into the Teutons in their thousands, point blank, every one of them causing a grievous and paralyzing wound. It does not stop them. The men behind jump over their comrades and keep moving forward, screaming out to their gods for blood. The next volley has the same effect, and a second line of Teutons falls in multitudes. The centurions bawl for the men to draw their swords, and the third Teuton line, exhausted and slow after clambering over the heaps of dead and dying, rush up as fast as they can to the Roman front. There, their spears and swords clang off the reinforced canvas and calfskin-wrapped shields, and the legionaries strike out with the deadly gladius thrusts. Some of the Teutons have success and make contact with the men behind the shield, but as each legionary falls, another takes his place. Within seconds, the Teuton line is being pushed back. Marius's statement on the disadvantage of the slope proving unerringly accurate. Before a few minutes are out, the Romans are in control, and the Teutons are struggling to stay in place and avoid being pinned against the now approaching river. Tutabad will not let his people be defeated so easily, however, and he harries more and more men forward, adding weight to the press and attempting to push through. The Roman line halts for a moment, and for that 1 second, the result seems to hang in the balance. Will the tribesmen's valor and fortitude overcome the Roman superiority of terrain and tactics? The question is answered all too quickly. From the distance, at the rear of the Teuton line, the sound of cavalry trumpets blare. It is Claudius Marcellus and his 3,000 cavalrymen who have concealed themselves in the woods at the rear of the enemy line and are now obeying Marius's order to attack once battle has been properly joined. They rush down from the tree line, causing pandemonium in the Teuton army. Attacked from two sides, a ripple of panic trembles over the Teuton line, and still the Romans press them, the cavalry acting like the hammer and the legions like the anvil. It is too much. All too quickly, the Teuton resistance crumples, and the fighting men sprint to retreat and get to safety. The river acts like a trawl line, blocking and swirling with the press of men. The Romans press directly into it, cutting and hacking through, leaving casualties by the thousands. Like a remorseless pack of prey beasts, they move en masse, killing and eviscerating. The legions move over the river without trouble, and soon it is the turn of the Teutons' camp to feel the wrath of fire and Gladius. The screams of the dead and injured rise up to the air along with the black smoke, the only color that the doomed see before they leave this earth being the reflection of fire in their killers' eyes. Plutarch records that the deaths among the Ambrones and Teutons numbered in the hundreds of thousands, while those of the legions were negligible. Whatever the truth of these figures, it is clear that the Romans have inflicted a toll on their enemies far heavier than even they themselves suffered at Arausio. The greater part of the tribal invasion forces are obliterated, and Marius is confirmed in yet another consulship. Now, with his 6 legions, plus an equivalent number of auxiliaries, he strikes out to join Catulus's holding force and confront the Cimbri. Marius will bring down those who were directly responsible for the devastation at Arausio, and then he will return to Rome as near to a king as any man in the history of the Republic. For the moment, all of his auguries and prophecies are proving to be propitious of nothing but greatness and everlasting success. If you like what you see, consider supporting my work on Patreon, and you get ad-free early access to my videos for as little as $1. You can also show your support by liking the video, commenting, and subscribing to my channel as a sacrifice to the algorithm. As always, I'll see you in the next one.